You've probably seen one of the orange Mustangs that Bob Bondurant Racing School had. Some of them were GTs, some of them were even older GTs. They even had a few of the SN95 Cobras, and I know Late Model Restoration has a Coyote swapped one that even had a Mach 1 engine at one point as well. But these are not to be confused with the bright tangerine orange Mustang GTs that were made in 1996, or even the Shinoda versions of those tangerine orange Mustang GTs. These were not the same cars. The Bondurant cars were white cars that were painted and even modified by Rouge and some other companies for racing. And I wanted to talk about the 99 Cobra version of these Bondurant cars, and a special one that I'm going to talk about, which is actually one of 20 of these 99 Cobras that Bondurant had. Although some say that there were 56 of them built, I'm not sure on the exact number, and that might be 56 Mustangs built that Bondurant had at the time. But anyway, I want to go over some of the things about these cars because they are quite special. They went down the assembly line and then they were hand picked off. They had welds done to them. They were built by Rouge, and some of them still had the full interior. You can see the parchment color interior and the radio and everything. The door panels are there, but you can see they have a net for racing, and they have a racing seat in here. And there's a lot of things that you'll see as you look at these cars that are a little different than a normal Cobra. They came with the 4.6 liter 4-valve with 320 horse. They say they also had a custom Bondurant engine calibration. And the cooling system is actually really interesting. It says that it had the 6.8 liter V10 water pump and the Cobra R radiator, and it was supposedly an engine-driven fan. You can see the shroud there. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but that's what they are saying when they talk about these cars and when people are marketing and selling them. So they have electric cooling fans, but I don't know how it would be an electric cooling fan, and maybe it was that and a water pump driven fan. But supposedly it was the shroud with the 18-inch fan, and then they called it the 2000 Cobra R engine oil cooler. That's what they said was on the car as well. Battery located in the trunk, and an explosion-proof box with a quick disconnect and terminals. It had the same T45 transmission that came in the Cobras. It's the 5-speed. It's the earlier 5-speed of the New Edge Mustangs. And so that was the 5-speed that would be in the 96 to 99 GTs and Cobras. And then later they went to the TR3650 for the Mach 1s, the Bullets. Anyway, the later GTs got a different transmission. But this T45 had carbon fiber locking rings that were hand assembled by Rouge. They also had the B&M Ripper shifter, and that was actually on the Cobra R as well, even though it's a different transmission. I have one of those B&M Ripper shifters. They're pretty big. But anyway, they also had a custom steel drive shaft with a safety loop and 355 axle gear ratio, so I thought that was pretty cool. All the 99 Cobras, as far as I know, came with the 327 gears, so it's pretty neat that they changed the gear ratio for that. Now, as far as the fuel tank is concerned, it actually had a 22-gallon fuel cell that was custom stainless steel braided fuel lines. You know, the front suspension was different. The Eibach springs that it had were 800-pound springs. It had Monroe struts and custom calibration. And this is where a lot of problems start to come in, because it is set for a camber of 3.2 degrees negative, caster 4.0 degrees positive, toes 0.10 degrees negative. And when you get into this, this becomes one of the biggest problems with these cars is they have cut and welded strut towers, and they've modified these cars so much that they are purpose-built race cars, and they're really not going to make a good street car. And as we'll learn later, it actually could be hard to title one of these because they were never titled. Some people do, and I see the license plates on them, but they said that's actually something really difficult, is to title one of these cars. And so then the rear springs were 350 pound per inch springs with Monroe struts and custom calibration as well there. And it also had a rear panhard bar. And so that would be a solid axle. And so I find it interesting that the Bondurant cars did not have the independent rear suspension, the IRS. And that's just like that story I recently did about the Mach 1 build your own race cars. They didn't come with independent rear suspension. You would think that a car that would be so track dedicated for road racing would have the IRS. As far as the brakes were concerned, they had the PBR Australia brakes. Those were just the same 13-inch Brembo brakes that you see on all the Cobras for that generation, which I think is pretty neat that they use them for racing because there are definitely better ones out there. Now, obviously, they used a Performance Friction 90 compound race brake pad and then custom brake cooling ducts, so that's pretty cool. And then these had the Recaro seats in them. Supposedly, they said Bondurant on them. They were special order, but a lot of people say they're faded and you can't see them anymore. And these cars might have had pretty worn out seats from all the racing years and might not have those in them anymore. But it also had a harness belt with a cam lock, racing window net like we saw in that picture, and a 6-point fully integrated Roush safety roll bar. So I mean, this is definitely a race car. There's nothing about this that is going to be really enjoyable to use as a street car, and that's kind of where our story comes in today with the Cobra that I wanted to talk about. There was an article called Project Phoenix that was in one of the Mustang magazines, and they talk a lot about how this is a great car if you buy it for what it is and use it exactly how it was built. But if you buy this car and you expect to modify it any further or try to return it to a street car, you're going to be in a world of hurt because this is not very possible. I mean, everything's possible, but for how much money, right? So they got one of these Bondurant cars and they got a truckload of parts. It's kind of funny because it's in a red F-150 and you're thinking, this is the scene from a movie, is it not? A red F-150 carrying tons of racing parts to build something up. And on a little side note, I just think it's kind of cool that I believe this particular Cobra spent some time as a teaching tool, but it was also a Georgia Tech car where they used it at a technical school for practice. And in this picture, I think it's kind of cool. You can see the white firewall there, and you'll see some more white interior pieces where you can tell that these cars were originally white. But the biggest problem with this, like we were talking about here with all the parts they bought, they decided they were going to buy this car, turn it into even more of a race car, and go have some fun with it. And I don't know if it had a running engine at the time. I know they got an illuminator for it, and we'll talk about that in a second here. But what they were saying was this project was kind of a flop. They don't want to ever say that it was a waste of time because they did learn things from it. And they said the biggest thing they learned was to caution folks about things that went wrong when you try to do a project like this. And that starting with a custom-made car was certainly a big mistake. They said they would buy another one of these cars in a heartbeat. They're really neat cars, they're great race cars, but they would never try to further modify one of these again because they are custom made cars, and that means that the parts that fit on any other Mustang will not fit on this car. They ran into that every step of the way. The fuel system, for example, it has a fuel cell and it had the 93 Cobra fuel pumps in it instead of the 99 Cobra pumps, and they didn't know that. And the 93 Cobra pump was not good enough to handle what the Illuminator engine was going to be putting out. Like we talked about the cooling system, they said it's not the same. It was a modified version of a Cobra R radiator and oil cooler, and that all the engine hoses that they had used were hand cut. They called Bondurant Racing School and they said, oh yeah, they went to the local auto parts store, they found any hose that would fit, they cut it down and trimmed it to their Mustangs. So at this point, the guy who bought this car was like, what have I gotten myself into? And then he continued to look into things like the suspension and realized that everything had been cut and welded and made by Roush to fit a special way, and that there weren't any aftermarket caster camber plates that were going to fit or work on this car to make it drive right. Basically what ended up happening was they had to take it to a shop who could custom weld, cut, and make this car work. And they said that another shop told them it couldn't be done. But they ended up going to another shop that was able to get in there and do everything that needed to be done and get the car ready. And another challenge they came to is when they went to drop the car down for the corner weighting process, that's when they couldn't lower the car to the required ride height anymore because the earlier decisions of Roush and everything that had been done really screwed everything up. The reinforcement plates lowered the panhard bar mount about 1/4 of an inch, and that slight difference caused the panhard bar mount to hit the sway bar mount. And that was all happening when they were lowering the coilovers and trying to get it to sit right. So tons of problems here. And to add insult to injury, they finally got the car put together and done up by the shop and able to be a track car. They installed the brand new Ford Racing Illuminator engine and quickly found out that it had an issue and that there were problems in the cylinders. So they pulled that illuminator out, sent it back to Ford, and Ford discovered that it had aluminum oxide in the cylinders, which caused scoring of the cylinder walls and loss of compression. So here, at that point, it broke the bank. Now, supposedly that was the end of the project, although I did find updated posts about how they had taken the plexiglass windows out and changed them, and there were some updated pictures of the suspension with Maximum Motorsports and the clutch that they had in there and the coilover system. And there was a post on SVT Performance where the guy who built this car was actually selling it, and he wanted somewhere in the $20,000 range for it. It had a new transmission, new engine. So I think he got the illuminator replaced or something, maybe bought a new one, but it had an illuminator with 4 GT cams, CNC ported heads, Daytona prototype magnesium intake manifold, spec road racing clutch and aluminum flywheel, brand new T56 transmission with the B&M shifter, custom D&D aluminum drive shaft, full Maximum Motorsports grip box. It has the Motion Club Sport Reserve canister, coilover shocks, and struts with iBox springs, StopTech 13-inch brakes with 2-piece rotors, and PFC brake pads. It has Percy's Speed Glass windshield, back glass and quarter windows, plus Pro Tint tear-offs, and this Fulcrum Aeroworks carbon fiber rear wing, and a Mare Racing front splitter. So, I mean, this thing is a total race car. This is definitely not going to be a street car, and people were saying, well, can I get it titled for the street? Can I get it registered? And he was saying, no, I'm not selling it like one of those cars. This is a race car, and it's going to be really hard. And he was saying how hard he had heard it was to register and insure and title a Bondurant car. And people have done it before, I guess, and people are saying, well, if you're selling it, you need to do that first. And he's saying, look, you guys don't get the point. This is a race car. It's not a street car. And he only had 6 dyno poles on it, and that's all that he was going to do with it. He was interested in selling the car so he could do another project for the magazine. But this car was basically brand new. And with all that stuff done to it, he had mentioned how you could not build a car for this price that would be such a race car like that. But it is neat to know that these cars still do have VIN numbers on them, because some race cars don't have VIN numbers, and this probably technically could be registered and driven on the street if you just wanted to buy it as a car to show off and drive it to a Cars and Coffee or something. But that question was answered in the comments when people were asking, does it even have a VIN number? The answer was yes, it does. And anyway, so that was a great example of what these Bondurant cars are and the challenges you will have if you buy one of these and you want to try to make it something that it's not. And just like he had said, he would buy another one of these in a heartbeat, but just leave it as what it is, use it for what it is. When I went to Willow Springs recently, there was an older Bondurant 94, 95 Mustang GT. That was a Bondurant car, and it was racing around the track, and it was cool to see because it's doing what it was made for. As a matter of fact, I believe there were 3 of them there, so that was cool to see a few of them out there racing. I know if you're going to compete in different levels, I'm sure this car isn't going to be for you, but anyway, just thought it was really cool that the story was in the magazine a long time ago, and then I was able to find this updated version of the story of the car and when the guy was selling it and everything that had done to it. So really cool story. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more Mustang content.